The elderly witness approached the stand in the traffic accident case. He walked with slow but determined steps, his hair white, his posture straight, with a small but gleaming medal pinned to his chest. Judge Richard Stevens looked him up and down, frowning. The judge asked how old he was, his voice cold and distant. The elderly man said he was 76. The judge asked if his night vision was good at this age. The man replied, "Yes, sir." The judge asked in an even harsher tone whether his license was still valid, or if old age was causing confusion for him too. The courtroom had grown uncomfortable. These questions were much harsher and more degrading than necessary. The elderly man remained calm and said all his documents were valid. The judge did not look satisfied. He fixed his eyes on the medal on the man's chest. The judge told him to remove that medal, saying this was a courtroom, not a show-off place. At that moment, someone in the gallery stood up. The man told the judge that the medal was a medal of honor, that this man was a war hero. Courtroom number 3 of the Riverside County Courthouse suddenly froze. No one was breathing. The weight of the words, "Medal of Honor," filled the room. Judge Richard Stevens had lost his words for the first time in his life. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before you begin listening to this powerful story, write in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. But this story didn't start here. This story began 3 hours earlier when Joseph Francis Emory left his home. Joseph had woken up early that morning as always. Despite being 76 years old, he still maintained a regular lifestyle. He would wake up at 6, drink his coffee, tend to his garden, then spend the rest of the day quietly. But today was different. Today he was going to court as a witness. He was going to testify about that terrible traffic accident he had witnessed 3 months ago. On Riverside's main street at 11:30 at night, he had witnessed a man named Ryan Carter crash into Emily Johnson's car. Emily had been seriously injured. She had spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Carter claimed the accident was Emily's fault. Joseph knew the truth. Carter had been speeding. He had run a red light. But would anyone believe him? An old man in the darkness of night, 76 years old. Who would listen to him? That's why he had worn that medal, his Medal of Honor. Normally, he only wore it on very special days. On memorial days, at funerals of old comrades, sometimes at church. But today was different. Today, his voice needed to be heard. The Medal of Honor wasn't just any medal. It was America's highest military decoration. It was only given to those who showed the greatest heroism, to those who risked their own lives to save others' lives under enemy fire, face to face with death. Joseph had earned it in Vietnam. In 1971, in the Mekong Delta, when a helicopter crashed. That day had been a routine reconnaissance flight. Joseph was a sergeant in the 1st Air Cavalry Division. He loved helicopters, loved the sky, but he didn't love war. Nobody really did. The helicopter had crashed suddenly. Engine failure, pilot error, or enemy fire. Joseph never found out. What mattered was that 9 men were trapped in that wreckage. Joseph was at an observation post about 200 meters away at the time. He had heard the radio call. They had shouted, "Mayday, Mayday, we're going down." Then silence. His commanders had given clear orders. No one would approach. They were under enemy fire. They would wait for the rescue team, but Joseph couldn't wait. Because he could see flames in the helicopter. Small flames at first, then a growing fire. Those men would burn. 9 young men. The oldest was 23. Joseph ignored orders. He took his weapon, gathered his ammunition, and started running. For 200 meters, across open terrain, under enemy fire. When he reached the helicopter, 3 men were dead. 6 were wounded but alive. Joseph began pulling them out one by one. First man, wounded in the leg, critical but transportable. Joseph carried him to the safe zone, went back. Second man, wounded in the chest, struggling to breathe. Joseph carried him too. Third man, unconscious, head injured. Joseph put him on his back, ran. Fourth man, arms broken, couldn't walk. Joseph supported him. They walked. Fifth man, most critically wounded, couldn't move. Joseph took him in his arms. Sixth man, the pilot, trapped in the cockpit, unconscious, critically wounded. Joseph went inside the helicopter to get him out. Flames had begun consuming the electronics in the cabin. Smoke filled everything. When Joseph pulled out the pilot, he was wounded too. Blood was flowing from his shoulder, shrapnel pieces were in his leg. But he didn't stop, because his job wasn't finished. 3 dead soldiers were still inside the helicopter. Joseph couldn't leave them either. The U.S. Armed Forces never left anyone behind. Dead or alive, everyone was going home. Joseph entered the helicopter one last time. This time, it was more dangerous. The flames were out of control, fuel was leaking. It could explode at any moment. He pulled out the first dead soldier, then the second. As he was trying to get the third out, the helicopter exploded. Joseph was thrown 3 meters away. His ears were ringing, his eyes couldn't see, he couldn't breathe. But he was alive, and he had saved 9 men. 6 were alive, 3 were dead, but all were going home. Joseph had faced death twice that day, once while running under enemy fire, once when the helicopter exploded, but he never stopped. The Medal of Honor ceremony was held 6 months later at the Pentagon. Joseph wore his uniform, his family by his side, as President Nixon pinned on the medal. The president had said this medal was being given not only to him, but to the families of those 6 men he had saved. That thanks to Joseph, they would be able to take their fathers, brothers, and sons home. From that day forward, Joseph rarely wore the medal, not for show, but in places that deserved respect. That's why he had worn it today. After returning from Vietnam, Joseph had built a quiet life. He married, had 2 children, worked as a carpenter. He never bragged, never gave interviews to the media, never told heroic stories, because he hadn't forgotten the 3 soldiers who died that day. Robert Miller, 21 years old. David Thompson, 20 years old. Michael Rodriguez, only 19. Joseph was proud of the 6 men he had saved, but he also felt responsible for the 3 who died. Maybe if he had run faster, maybe if he had acted earlier, maybe they would be alive too. This burden had followed him for years. Nightmares, sudden ringing sounds, startling at helicopter sounds. No one called it PTSD back then. They just called it war fatigue. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, was the psychological problems experienced after war. Nightmares, panic attacks, sudden startling. There was no awareness about this back then. Joseph had learned to live with this burden, quietly, respectfully, humbly. His wife Margaret understood him. So did his children. His neighbors loved him. They called him Uncle Emory while he grew tomatoes in his garden, mowed the lawn, shoveled snow. None of them knew he was a Medal of Honor recipient. Until this morning. This morning, Joseph had decided to wear the medal because he respected the court. He believed in justice. He thought truth mattered. But Judge Stevens had mocked his respect. As Joseph was preparing to remove the medal, that voice rose from the gallery. The man in the gallery had told the judge that the medal was a Medal of Honor, that this man was a war hero. The speaker was Colonel Marcus Thompson, retired. He was also a Vietnam veteran. He knew Joseph. Actually, there wasn't a veteran who didn't know Joseph's story. Colonel Thompson stood up, straightened his shoulders. His voice was clear and determined. Thompson said that Joseph Francis Emory had saved 9 of their soldiers in the Mekong Delta in 1971, under enemy fire, risking his own life, despite being wounded. He stated that the Medal of Honor was America's highest military decoration, that wearing this medal was an honor. The courtroom had become completely silent. Judge Stevens had lost his words. He had never encountered such a situation in his life. Medal of Honor. Those words had changed the atmosphere of the room. The jury members stood up. First one, then another, then all of them. A moment of respect. The lawyers stood up. The court clerk stood up. The spectators stood up. The courtroom began applauding while standing. Slow, respectful, deep applause. Joseph stood at the witness stand, surprised. He hadn't expected this much attention. He just wanted to give his testimony. Judge Stevens raised his hand, asking for the applause to stop. His voice was cracking. The judge told Mr. Emory that he was sorry. He said he didn't know who he was. He paused when talking about the Medal of Honor. He said this country could never repay its debt to him. Joseph nodded and said he had just done his duty. The judge replied no. He said that he had gone beyond duty, that he had shown heroism. Colonel Thompson was still standing. He asked the judge for permission to tell Joseph's story. He said this courtroom needed to know what this man had done. The judge nodded and told Thompson, "Please." Colonel Thompson stepped to the center of the courtroom. His voice came out strong and clear. Thompson told about the UH-1 Huey helicopters that crashed in Vietnam's Mekong Delta in October 1971. He said 9 of their soldiers were inside, that a rescue operation was impossible under enemy fire. Thompson paused, looked at the courtroom. He told that Joseph Emory was a sergeant at the time, 200 meters away. He said his commanders had given the order to wait, but Joseph didn't wait. The courtroom held its breath. Thompson told how Joseph ran 200 meters across open terrain under enemy fire. He said when he reached the helicopter, 6 of their soldiers were alive, 3 were dead. He told how Joseph pulled out the 6 men one by one, then went back and pulled out the 3 dead soldiers too, and how the helicopter exploded as he was getting out. Thompson's voice trembled. He said those 6 men returned home, saw their families, raised their children, all thanks to Joseph Emory. The courtroom began applauding again, this time stronger, more emotional. Joseph stood at the witness stand, his eyes welling up. Remembering Vietnam was always difficult. Remembering those 3 dead soldiers was even harder. Judge Stevens stood up. He had stood up during a trial for the first time. The judge told Mr. Emory that this court thanked him, this country thanked him, and he personally apologized. Joseph raised his head and said it wasn't necessary, that he just wanted to give his testimony. The judge said, "Of course," but he said he wanted to say something first. He said he was the most honorable witness he had seen in this court's history. He said to continue wearing his Medal of Honor, that this medal was welcomed with respect here. Joseph smiled slightly and said thank you. That's when the testimony began. Joseph told what he had seen. Clear, precise, detailed. He told how the accident happened, what Ryan Carter did, that Emily Johnson was innocent. No one interrupted him. No one questioned his age. No one disputed his night vision, because the word of a Medal of Honor recipient was sacred. When the testimony ended, Joseph stepped down from the stand. He prepared to leave the courtroom with slow steps, but Judge Stevens stopped him. The judge told Mr. Emory to wait a minute. Joseph turned around. The judge said this court was grateful to him, but he said more importantly, this country was grateful to him. He said they lived freely here, thanks to heroes like him. Joseph bowed his head and said he had just done his duty. He said he had to be there that day. The judge said no. He said he didn't have to be there, that he chose to be. He said he valued 9 men's lives more than his own life, and that this was heroism. The courtroom stood up again. This time there wasn't just applause, but salutes too. Retired soldiers were giving military salutes. Civilians were putting their hands on their hearts. As Joseph left the courtroom, the silence he left behind was different. A silence full of respect. A silence full of honor. Outside, the sun was shining. Joseph walked toward his car, a modest Honda Civic, 15 years old but clean and well-maintained. As he was getting in the car, Colonel Thompson caught up with him. Thompson told Joseph he hadn't seen him in a long time. Joseph said, "Hello, Marcus," hoped he was well. Thompson said he was fine. He asked Joseph how he was, if he still lived in the same house. Joseph said yes. He hadn't changed. He said Margaret's garden was still beautiful. He asked Thompson how he was. Thompson said he was fine, but felt very proud today. He said it was beautiful to watch that medal receive the respect it deserved. Joseph smiled and said respect wasn't for the medal, but for what the medal represented, for the 3 children who died that day. Thompson said, Robert Miller, David Thompson, Michael Rodriguez. He said he hadn't forgotten. Joseph said he would never forget. The 2 retired soldiers shook hands. Words were unnecessary. Everything had already been said. Joseph got in his car and headed home. The same quiet streets, the same familiar houses. Nothing had changed, but something had changed actually. Today he had seen the respect shown to his Medal of Honor. He had seen that this country still believed in values. He had seen that justice was still possible. When he got home, Margaret was waiting at the door. Margaret asked how the court went. Joseph said it went well, that he gave his testimony. Margaret asked if he wore his medal. Joseph said yes. Margaret said he did well. That medal deserved respect. Joseph hugged his wife. 50 years of marriage, but she was still the only person who understood him. That evening, Joseph sat in his garden, looking at his tomato seedlings. The sun was setting, the air was getting cool. The Medal of Honor was still on his chest. He hadn't taken it off, because today he had remembered its value. That medal didn't belong only to him. That medal belonged to Robert Miller, David Thompson, Michael Rodriguez. He wore it in their memory, and maybe he would wear it more often now, because this country needed to remember its heroes. This country needed to remember its values. The Medal of Honor wasn't just a medal. It was the price of freedom. It was the symbol of sacrifice. It was the promise that no one would be left behind. Joseph slept peacefully that night, because he had done his duty, not just in court, but in his life. The next day, the newspapers ran the story. Medal of Honor recipient veteran shown respect in court. But Joseph didn't even read the newspaper, because he had already seen that respect. In Judge Stevens' eyes, in the courtroom's silence, in that standing ovation, and that was enough for him. But the story didn't end here. 3 days later, the case was concluded. After Joseph's testimony, Ryan Carter's lawyer was forced to confess. He admitted that his client had been speeding, had run a red light, that the accident was his fault. Justice had been served for Emily Johnson. Her medical expenses would be covered. She would receive compensation for her injuries. Joseph's testimony had saved her legal battle and ensured truth prevailed over deception. Emily said she wanted to visit Joseph to thank him personally, but Joseph politely declined. He said he had just done his duty, that his get-well wishes were with her, and that seeing justice served was thanks enough. Judge Stevens had changed after that day. He now treated witnesses differently, showing respect regardless of age or appearance. He had learned that wisdom and credibility don't always come in expected packages. The experience taught him that true greatness often walks quietly among us. The courthouse installed a special plaque for Medal of Honor recipients, with respect to all veterans who have served in this courtroom and this nation. Joseph began wearing his Medal of Honor more often after that day, not out of pride, but out of responsibility, because that medal didn't belong only to him. That medal was the memory of Robert Miller, David Thompson, Michael Rodriguez, 3 young men who deserved to be remembered. And every time he wore it, he remembered them. Every time he wore it, he remembered the most important lesson he learned that day in Vietnam. No one gets left behind. This lesson applied in the courtroom too. Emily Johnson had not been left behind. Justice had not been left behind. Truth had not been left behind. Joseph Francis Emory had saved 6 men that day in Vietnam. Today he had also saved a woman's justice in the courtroom. Because heroes never retire, they just fight on different battlefields. And Joseph's fight continued. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the heroes who walk among us unrecognized every single day, we want to hear from you. Share in the comments below where you're watching from, whether it's a small town in Texas, a bustling city in New York, or anywhere else around the world. Tell us if you've ever met someone like Joseph, a quiet hero whose story deserves to be heard. If you believe the stories of silent heroes need to be told, if you think these forgotten warriors deserve recognition for their sacrifice and service, please subscribe to the Silent Heroes channel. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that true greatness doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Help us ensure these stories reach the people who need to hear them most. Because every veteran's story deserves to be remembered, not just the famous ones told in movies and books, but the quiet ones like Joseph's that happen in courtrooms and ordinary places where extraordinary people live ordinary lives. Every act of heroism deserves respect, whether it happened on a battlefield in Vietnam or in a moment of moral courage when someone chose to stand up for what's right. Every sacrifice made in service to others should never be forgotten by a grateful nation that owes its freedom to people like Joseph Francis Emory, one quiet act of courage at a time.